Okay, welcome everyone. Today we are delving into a very thought-provoking topic of generative AI and threat modeling, exploring the use cases for Gen AI in cybersecurity, DevSecOps, and more. It is my pleasure to introduce two great speakers today. We've been collaborating with them in some form since 2019. So Maria and John, we're so happy to have you here to share your expert views. Maria Schwenger is Executive Advisor for Emerging Technologies, and John Taylor is a Senior Manager of Global Cybersecurity, A&D Application Security and Design. And yes, I did write those down to make sure I got them correct for you. Both John and Maria have fascinating backgrounds and experience in cybersecurity, so we're very fortunate to have them delivering this session. In terms of what Irius Risk is doing for AI, we can share that we have developed the first of its kind security library, which we're proud to say allows our users to threat model their AI and machine learning applications and systems, which is fantastic for organizations using data and outputs from these types of models. Even better news, you can become a free community user of Irius Risk and get access to this library for free. So in a moment, we'll paste a link in the chat in case you feel like signing up after this session. So without further ado, I shall disappear and hand over to the brilliant Maria and John, and strap yourselves in for this because you're in for an exciting ride. Enjoy.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Claire. And before we start, I just want to express big gratitude to our host at Irius Risk for making this event possible. Thanks to my co-speaker, John, and of course, thanks to you guys, to our audience for sharing your lunchtime with us. Hopefully, this is going to be very educational and very interesting event for you as well. So let's get started. The very first thing we wanted to mention is the acknowledgement of the disclaimer. Both John and I, we don't have any affiliation with any of the vendors, products, programs, services, offerings that we may mention, any links that we may show. This session is not intended to provide any advisory, and the examples, results, opinions shared are our personal. They may not necessarily represent the statements or the opinion of our employers as well. And with that, let's get to the agenda slide, please. So how is this session organized today? We'll talk about generative AI and Gen AI. We'll contrast and compare them. Then we'll talk about the mechanics behind the Gen AI, because the title of our session is Gen AI Primer. So we'll kind of prime the Gen AI. Then we'll talk about the role of Gen AI in industries, cybersecurity, and more specifically into the threat modeling. So there will be a discussion between John and me going through every single stage of the threat modeling process and what kind of a potential use cases we may have for that. And we'll finish with how to get ready for adapting of Gen AI for threat modeling specific. Now, we have a lot of slides and a lot of text on these slides. You guys usually have seen a picture from me and I talk over the picture, preferably a funny picture. But this time we have a lot of text, and this is intentional. Many people ask me to summarize in writing for future reading or for them just to copy and paste and go from there. So we try to accommodate this ask this time. Yes, the slides and probably the recording are going to be posted. I would post the slides on my LinkedIn profile as usually, guys, I believe in sharing. And we may not have time for Q&A due to the very large volume of the information that we are presenting today. But of course, your feedback is extremely important to us. So if you can please utilize the chat feature within Zoom and kind of ask us about to share your comments and questions there. If we don't answer today or I don't answer the question throughout the presentation, I will definitely try to address them. And with that, let's go. Who are your presenters? I'm not going to talk about what John and I have done in the past. What is important is that we are cybersecurity professionals. We are passionate about cybersecurity. We are passionate about application security, data protection. And by the way, specifically for the threat modeling, John AI started to work in 2019 to promote the concept of threat modeling and to try to implement and to help implement it at various companies. So we have a long history with that, and we are very proud of it, and we're looking for the next advancement that we can have. So let's start with on the next slide with the prevalence of AI. Now, this is the general, narrow regular AI, whatever you'd like to call it. But there's no doubt today that it's beyond the hype. Doesn't matter if this is a IBM Watson winning Jeopardy example or AlphaGo defeating Listedo on the Go game, or Netflix that recommends our movies, or the new delivery systems for pizza parcels, or even your home assistants or smart appliances that drive you crazy, right? If you take a look into the square in the middle, these are all AI applications with all of the AI intelligent capabilities we are building learning system and AI enables, and they are currently part of your life. Also, think about it in a different way. We have huge advancements in China surveillance, face surveillance. We have Cambridge Analytica example, so deep fakes that are proliferating just because the artificial intelligence is so democratized today. So we have the bad examples as well. But what about GenAI? So let's look at the next slide. GenAI still feels like the elephant in the room, doesn't it? Right? And so let's take a look at the word cloud. By the way, I snatched this one somewhere from the a link, and I don't remember. I put the sources unknown because I don't remember where I got it from. But this was when kind of the interest to ChatGPT grew up very fast, and this was the original people association. So let's take a look at the purple color. ChatGPT. Okay, it's an AI. Very good. Bias, right? So people automatically expect that it's an AI and it will have a bias. Let's look at the blue arrow. Generative. Okay, so it's generating something. Ethics and IP. Two huge red flags immediately. Let's take a look at the red color. Model. Okay, it's a model. Understanding, yes, understanding what we are saying, and context. And this is actually some of the most important thing about the GenAI is the context that we are going to use or lose or replace for these information purposes. So with all that it's said, the simple truth always applies. We have to follow the trusted AI principles, the same ones that we have been implementing for the last 10 years. I started with IBM Watson in 2014, and we've always been trying to have a transparent, ethical, explainable AI, like every technology, and to prevent the use for possibly for bad. So on the next slide, I would like to show you some of the top trends, AI trends for 2024, and nobody probably will be surprised if you guys see that generative AI is number one, of course. Huge consideration about bring your own AI and the shadow AI. We have problem with shadow IT all the time, and this is kind of something similar. One thing that I felt is a little bit interesting about bringing a shadow AI. This is all the unapproved usages for our company. So then we have open source AI. Yes, the open source models are more transparent. The open source models are more flexible, customizable, probably more cost effective. And I read that somewhere that by 2026, it's expected that every company, 86% of the businesses are expected to incorporate some type of open source AI model into their stack. Next one is interesting, a risk of hallucination. It becomes, as the AI becomes more, on the previous slide, as AI becomes a little bit more sophisticated, we expect more hallucinations. We will need to go forward with it. Can we get to the previous slide, please? Yeah. And one thing that was very interesting, I read somewhere that AI risk hallucination will have insurance. And this is expected to be a growing business. I found this kind of very peculiar. We already have AI coding, different tools to automate repetitive tasks, to optimize creative processes, write me a code based on my previous code or finish up my code, whatever that might be. AI tourism is something that I wanted to bring your attention because this is a framework that helps organizations to manage areas like explainability, like model ops, data anomaly detection, adversarial attacks resistance, data protection. So this is something that's going to come and help us as a framework to stay on the safe side. Of course, we have intelligent and personalization of AI. You see number 13, customer service, AI-powered online search. These are all things that we already see today. AI jobs, and what jobs are going to change, what jobs have to brand new to us. And of course, a lot of around AI legislation and the ethical portion that we all have to be proponents and all to be insisting for. Interesting was number 8, the merge of the quantum and AI. I didn't expect to see this one, but I think as a trend, this is kind of amazing. So from the next slide, we are going to start explaining what is the definition of AI, how AI works. And this is not just for GenAI, although you see it in red in the slide. So we are working based on machine learning algorithms. You see the different types of machine learning. So what is a machine learning? These are algorithms. They learn from data without explicit programming. They constantly improve their performance as well. So you see that you have a supervised learning because everything starts with a supervised learning. This is kind of like the student with the flashcards, learning from labeled data, and I'll show you examples after that of this. We also have a unsupervised learning when there's no flashcards, there's no labeled data. So the unsupervised learning is making sense of unlabeled data. It's like a detective to automatically discover hidden patterns on its own. The reinforcement learning is even more interesting because it's a learning on its own, but think about it's based on trial and error. So it's like you play let's say maybe a game, like a video game, when if you do the right move, you get some treasures, or you have taken away something if you make the wrong step. And in the end, we have also the deep learning. This is mimicking how our brain works with layers of interconnected neurons. In our brain, human brain, we have between 86 and 100 billions of neurons. We need a large. It finds this large, learns this large complex patterns from vast majority of data. So it needs a lot of data. So we also have a natural language processing, computer vision, robotics. The most important portion is how the deep learning is actually using neural networks. The neural networks is actually, they work as like our brain works. They learn from mistakes as well. Imagine all these billions of neurons in our brain constantly monitoring something, and as soon as they catch this, what they're monitoring for, they spread it to their network, how it works. And then you have multiple layers. You've seen these diagrams of neural networks anywhere on the internet, and you have these multiple layers. So each layer acts like one small brain propagating to the next level. And with that, we can probably go to the next slide. Please, on the previous slide, just note this is from ResearchGate. I use ResearchGate every single day. If you guys would like to use it, it will be incredibly useful for you. This slide, I'm not going to spend any time. I just summarize everything what I was talking about, and kind of gave you a little bit of application on it as it goes to application. So let's move to the next slide. And here we have a little bit of first example. So we have the artificial intelligence, all of those different type of learning algorithms that I described, and the generative AI is somewhere there on the bottom, incorporated because it's using all of those learnings. And what is the important part here is what is our start. So we have data and label. And the algorithm, the traditional ML models are learning based on the relationships between the label and the data, and they're discriminative in their nature. So in the end, they're going to classify and they're going to spit out a label. They're going to give you a label. The unstructured content is the other thing that it goes into the generative AI. And generative AI model is not discriminative, it's a generative, right? And it's based on the learning of patterns within and recognizing those patterns within the unstructured content. So it's basically going to generate a new content for you. Let's get another example on the next slide. So we have training code, label data. The traditional ML model discriminates against it. It clusters, classification, predictions. And if you ask the question, an image of a cat, it's going to say, yeah, this is a cat. And, here you have this probability level. I'm 80%, 90% sure that this is a cat. And then I'm going to respond. Otherwise, I may not even respond to, probably don't provide an answer if you don't have certain amount of sureness, right? But the output can be a label, probability, number, discrete, class, something defined. And so how this works into the generative AI context, you have a training code, you have labeled data, you have a lot of unlabeled data, and then the model is generative. So if I say an image of a cat is going to generate a new content that can be natural language, text, image, video, audio, code, right? We generate code today, maybe a network diagram, why not? And if I ask the question, is this an image of a cat? The answer will be, here is I created a cat for you. Now, this might be a DALL-E futuristic style of cat. This might be a tiger. This might be a little kitten down on the street or on the trash can on top of a trash can. But this will be some type of a cat, something that the algorithm associates as a cat. So hopefully this example was a kind of a helpful. So we can go to the next slide and let's talk about all of those different algorithms that are coming here to life. So this will be a very lengthy conversation and it can take probably a whole session on itself, but I'll try to summarize it for you as much as I can. So I start with the transformer-based models just because ChatGPT and Google Bard are so close to us, right? So we are more familiar with it. This uses a transformer architecture, which kind of comes from the name comes from. It's a neural network architecture that is particularly well suited for natural language processing tasks. They're trained on large data sets. And they understand large relationships between sequential information as words and sentences. Based on deep learning, these AI models tend to adapt to NLP, understand the context of a sentence and language, and the language structures, making them well suited for text generation. ChatGPT, Google Bard are examples. Now, the pros and cons, I'll try to outline for each one. So the pros here are really that they're very powerful, very versatile. They can be used to generate a wide variety of data, but we have no real control of the output. They're computationally expensive as well. Not so, probably it requires a lot of computational power also to train them. And sometimes the output generated will need attention at the minimum, maybe make no sense, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's out of context. So we should probably kind of pay attention to that. The next category, the GANs and the VAEs are working on two neural networks that work together. That's kind of interesting about them. So the GANs are this generative model that uses two neural networks. One is the generator and the other is a discriminator to create the new data. So the generator is responsible for creating the new data, while the discriminator is responsible to distinguish which data is fake and which data is good. And GANs have been used to generate very realistic images, text, music, diagrams. They're really good at this realistic data. Have been used throughout. Actually, GANs can be difficult to train, so these are on the negative side, and we have very little control over the output, and sometimes they may generate data that is not really true. A lot of lately we have been talking about AutoGANs or the auxiliary classifier generative adversarial networks. Sorry, I have a problem with those abbreviations. This is a type of machine learning model that still utilizes the two neural networks, but they're used to generate realistic samples that resemble a target data set. So this function again has a generator, a model that takes random noise and inputs it and transforms it into samples that mimic the data that you want to generate. And then you have discriminator, we call it critique in this case. This model receives both the real data and the targeted data set and samples the generated data by the generator with the idea to tell it to provide the feedback back on how the generator can improve the creation of the data. So lately, because of the huge potential by adding this auxiliary classifier to the critics, this is actually something that people widely explore and see a lot of future into it. Now, the variational autoencoders, they also have two neural networks. In this case, they're called encoder and decoder. The encoder takes the input data and compresses it into a simplified format. In the machine learning, we call this one latent space or latent variable. So if you hear these terms, you know what that is. And decoder takes these latent representations and produces a new data similar, but not exactly the same. So for example, how we generate human faces, we use photos as training data. The encoder will simplify the photos of these people faces into important small characteristics, like, for example, size, shape of the eye spaces, nose, mouth, ears, right? And then the decoder uses those to create the new faces, okay? The VAEs obviously are very, very useful for creating various data types of data. The autoregressive models are not that popular, but they're type of generative model that generates new data one step at a time. And assuming that on each step the model predicts the next value into the sequence, and it's based on the values that we have already been generated. So this is something that I'm not going to spend more time, but it's interesting concept with a lot of potential. The flow-based model is also something with a lot of potential because it uses this probabilistic graphical model to represent the data distribution. So flow-based models are relatively new type, as I mentioned, but they have shown a great promise. So a lot of attention you're going to see there, with the main benefit that they can be very flexible and they can be used to generate, again, a lot of different types of data. Now, the last one is an interesting concept, and you're not going to see it everywhere. The multimodal models, they can understand and process multiple types of data simultaneously, such as text, images, audio, video, and allow them to create more sophisticated outputs. So DAO-E is one of those. I think it's a new concept, but again, a huge potential, and you should be probably familiar with them. I have not provided an example here, but I wanted just to bring to your attention the LLaMA, the large language model meta AI. This is an open source family of large language model of LLMs released by Meta, starting in the beginning of last year, I believe. And it's hosted on Hugging Face and other platforms. So a lot of people are using it. Probably 50% of the companies that I work with are using this model. So I just wanted to kind of mention it. And with that, a lot of talk, we can go to the next slide. When we kind of outline the use cases for GenAI, and you see, guys, on this slide, how much, almost every industry is kind of already represented here. Healthcare, digital marketing, education, finance, environment. By the way, by the finance, I put the Bloomberg GPT because they created their own model to service their own customers and their own needs, which is very neat, by the way. Go and read about it. What is the market? I mean, the market size is 51 billion by one company predicted, and with 35.6% growth, 100 billion by 2028 by another company prediction. Salesforce research shows that 37% of the advertisers and marketeers in US are using GenAI for their work-related tasks. And the value add, I mean, look at McKinsey. They're estimating 200 to 340 billion with B value added in banking, up to 660 billion in retail and consumer packaged goods. I mean, this is a huge opportunity. And with that, let's go to the next slide. This is specifically for the role, the integral role into the cybersecurity and into the cyber tech. And I don't doubt that we all understand the potential. I have two quotes put here on the screen. And you see kind of most of the vendors, cybersecurity vendors, share those common directions. And a lot of good progress has been already made. Companies for real-time threats, for hunting internal threats, so there's so much work that already has been done that can be taken and implement into other use cases. And with that, let's go to the next slide. And I have some of the GenAI in cyber tech use cases. And of course, we talk about attack surface reduction. We talk about generating realistic attack simulations or our test plans or our test cases or our test suite, detecting anomalies, supporting post-breach forensics, supporting data loss prevention, real-time risk assessments, various type of prioritization, risk mitigation strategies and priorities, improving existing AI tools or maybe enhancing cryptographic discoveries. There's so much, but if you take a look at the orange, so there's some use cases that are very basic and you can see them underneath every other use case. For example, the anomaly detection is one of those very basic cases. Data reconstruction in yellow, or data augmentation, synthetic data creation. These are use cases that can be applied to any other industry even, but specifically to any of the branches in the cyber tech. And with that, we can go to the next slide and specifically take a look at the DevSecOps use cases. And the reason I have this slide here is not just to kind of show you what I usually talk about when I mean DevSecOps and GenAI, but the very first line in green, please take a look at it. All the time I start talking with a threat modeling, because this is our first step to be at the better state, because this is our first protection, first guarantee that we are going to do better in this wild cybersecurity landscape today. So that's kind of that was the idea of this slide. And on the next slide, I would like to talk to you a little bit more about the threat modeling and the GenAI and an actual narrow or general AI as well. This is not a new conversation, okay? It's not a new conversation. We have initial use cases, proactively identify threats, vulnerabilities, attack vectors, mitigations, validation, generate diverse and realistic attack scenarios, reduce the time for creating a threat model, make it more accurate, make it more complete, make it better, or basically tell me, hey, you really need to go and update it because we may have some real threat intelligence that brings new conditions that may impact my threat model. And just look at the expected outcomes. This is kind of a generic data that I copied here into a small table. False positives reduction 20 to 40%, time saved 30 to 50%, accuracy improvement 10 to 20%. And I'm not saying these numbers are accurate, they're approximate, but just look at the potential. So there's a lot of publications, and I just put a couple of those. I just didn't have more space on the slide. Now, they're separate usually into two different categories. One of them is how to generate a threat model using AI or a GenAI. So using GenAI or AI to help us to generate our threat models. The second portion actually is different. It's more concerned, hey, how to generate threat model for my GenAI deployments. And so you're going to see both options, a couple of examples for both options. And I do also added the artificial intelligence corner by NIST for your reference. And with that, let's start talking specifically for threat modeling. And I'll give the mic to John.
Great. So thanks, Maria. There's a lot of great useful information here as we dive into threat modeling. So one of the first things I want to do is just give a clear definition of threat modeling. It's really a systematic approach to identify, understand, mitigate potential security threats to your applications, your systems. And generally, this is typically integrated into your SDLC for proactive security management. It's a process in which we do things. And there's a few benefits here that I want to talk about briefly that kind of gives you a good idea of how this helps us overall in our security posture. So first off, proactive defense. It's really good that we can actually realize or see and identify vulnerabilities before they become a breach. So think about this. If I know something now and I can do something about it, it's not going to impact me later. So we moved from a reactive approach to a lot more proactive, and we're reducing our attack surface. And we're kind of really able to see this and optimize our investments from security. So we get a better sense of that proactive defense. The next point is around developer-centric security. How do we empower our development teams to build security from the start? We've talked about shift left. And really here, we have the opportunity to simplify the security considerations early. We can look at that. We can improve our code quality. And that leads to one of my favorite things around bridging the security gap. As we have that developer-centric security going on, we're able to build trust. And that's a key thing in this whole process overall as we look through our applications, because we need to foster the collaboration. We need to increase our transparency, breaking down silos. I can speak for myself. I've gotten into a lot of organizations where there are barriers that are there. And this is one of the many ways that I've been able to overcome and bring people together to take down those silos. And really, we can become more collaborative and move forward. Another element too for threat modeling is total cost optimization, right? We can save time. If I know about it now and handle it while I'm developing and building something, it certainly saves me a lot of time because I don't have to do it very later when I have to tear things apart. Also, money. Why don't I deal with it now? Because it's a lot cheaper for me to build it in early rather than having to tear things apart when something's ready for production or in production and go back and fix things and redo the whole process. Retest, do all these different things you have to do. It just takes time. And also reputation. If we have this stuff, we have this knowledge, we know about our threats, we know about these different things that can go wrong, we can potentially save ourselves from costly breaches. If we know that there's something there that we need to address and it's important, let's do that. It reduces remediation times, we put controls in place. It can cost us a lot if something goes wrong. And once again, that also ties into optimizing our resource allocation. We can focus on where it's important and what we need to do and just continually evolves that for us. One last thing is thinking about future proof of your security. How do we stay ahead of evolving threats? How do we improve? How do we be prepared for the unknown? How we build resilience? And those are the kinds of things that we think about. And when we see the results from threat models, and as we dig deeper into the process, you'll get a better sense of how that's there and how we can leverage GenAI and sources to be able to improve upon that. Two things to note about threat modeling is it's not about eliminating everything, all risk, but it's really about how you identify and proactively manage them, knowing what's in front of you, knowing what could come, being able to manage that in a way that works well for your organization. Many times people think about threat modeling, oh, it's just an application, oh, it's just software code. No. Apply it to your infrastructure, your networks, even physical security. Right now, what I'm working on are some projects that are all around infrastructure and networks. And we're modeling out how those data flows go, how those different things work. So it's not focused on the app, it's focused on the network and then the landing zone where it's being hosted. So we include that in because we understand those two different things. So remember, it goes across a little bit further. All right, so let's talk about some general use cases across all the stages of threat modeling. So Maria, if you want to take us into that and dive some deeper into here.
Yes, thank you. So guys, there was one question that I wanted to address. Is there a government or some regulatory mandate for doing threat modeling? I personally have not seen a mandate, but I take it from a different perspective. For example, you read GDPR and it says you are responsible for your data and for your applications, and to be properly designed. So it has to be built in, it has to be by design. So I kind of take this one as a nudge to, hey, you really need to do it. What is the best way for that? Okay, threat modeling is probably one of the most important things. John, anything else to add to this question?
Yeah, actually, I get asked this a lot and have to deal with this, especially with where I'm working and what I'm doing is this mandatory? So there are documents and instructions and recommendations from common industry things such as NIST around minimum developer, security aspects, and threat modeling is one of those recommendations. Is it mandatory? Not quite yet. However, there are cases where I think that we're going to see that starting to happen and rather soon. Somebody's made a comment here around threat modeling, FedRAMP. Is mandatory for FedRAMP. Well, that's great, right? That's one step in that direction. I think we're going to see that change over time, and that's a whole other conversation that we can get into. But let's dive back into what Maria has.
Let's go back to the slide. This, guys, is probably one of the kind of my favorite slides, and I'll tell you why. Because this is the slides where we are starting to dream together. We are starting to build our wish list, and we can have this wish list and go to our vendors and say, hey, this is what we want you to do for us. This is what we need on the field. So please dream with us as we discuss those topics. So there's definitely GenAI use cases that can be applied across the all stages of the threat modeling process. And actually, they can be also applied across the industry. What about the data-related use cases? Data flow analysis, data flow mapping, synthetic data generation. A lot of analysis, analyzing my threat model, or that might be my old threat model, or maybe my brand new threat model. Analyzing existing incidents, of course, threat intelligence streams, predicting future threats, prioritizing mitigation strategies. Historical data analysis, global intelligence for proactive modeling to let us know, hey, this is a big trend that I see, you probably should consider it. A lot around risk and compliance, integration with regulatory and compliance standards, generated automatically assessments, reports for different regulatory and compliance events. Advanced visualization, creating these graphical representations of systems, diagram generation, let's say network diagram, automatically generating documentation, reports, knowledge bases, and facilitating education and fostering knowledge sharing and team collaboration going through this. And the wish list should start from now on. With that, John, back to you.
Right. So we've talked a little about some general use cases. So thank you that, Maria. So we want to dive in to talk a bit about threat modeling and what goes on, what are those phases. That'll help you put some context in as Maria continues to describe more of the GenAI use cases and the wish list and the things we'd like to see. So first off, when you're building a threat model, is you got to define scope and objectives. That basically is saying, hey, what are we going to model? What parts of a product might we model? And also establishing our goals and desired levels of protection. And we have to understand the data and the assets that are at stake. We know working with the business, figuring out what those things are. So what are we going to build? What are we going to model? From those conversations, that leads us into another phase where we decompose things. We take the system, we break it down into smaller, manageable components, right? We want to identify all of those assets, and that includes our data, the functionality, entry points. It's an API. Maybe there's an admin user interface where there's somebody accessing something across the internet. What controls go there? What are our exit points? Does data get processed and then sent to another place for processing? Or are we retrieving data from somewhere else? What are those things? You know, when we look at our data flow and we map that between our components, we can also look at external dependencies. Is something else coming from somewhere that is being brought in? Are there frameworks that we're using in our products that we're creating, you know, external from what we normally have? Are we bringing in those things into our code? Where are we doing those things? So we need to understand that. And with this information, you want to generate that visual representation. It's like a data flow diagram, an infrastructure diagram. It gives us a visual representation so we can look at it and see very quickly what we have. So from that, what do you think the use cases are? And Maria, you can discuss this for these two particular phases.
Next slide, please. So we kind of separated this slide between making a threat model, defining the scope and the objective between a new threat model, or when we are building new feature, or maybe a feature for existing product. And when we kind of go retroactively and build a threat model for already existing system that might be in production. So although kind of a similarities, there's different use cases. So we can provide the knowledge base and the guidance that can include not just threat modeling information and not only cybersecurity information, can also include business related information, because this is where in many cases, we may be lacking information. And so this knowledge base plus, you know, purely technical information, maybe about the cloud, let's say AWS I'm using today. So I'll have some AWS documents ingested. So this can equip the analysts with a proper understanding and help them to speed up their work and their human oversight. We can identify to look at the integration points. Okay, I'm bringing this new feature, how that's going to impact my integration with my existing products, or just recommend a security objective. On the other side, we can have automated system identification for threat modeling, and I'll talk a little bit this on some of the next slides. We can capture current threats, security concerns, and kind of just make a specific security requirements, generate them based on that. Now, one area that people are not talking too much about, and it's a great area for GenAI, is how to prepare for threat modeling conversation with business users. How many of you guys, give me thumbs up, I don't know if I can see them, but give me a thumbs up if you feel that talking to business users about threat modeling is a piece of cake. I don't expect to see any cases, any hands raised, because it's always hard, right? So automated review or generation of initial threats landscape, identification of scope objectives, so we can go and it helps us to go and talk to this business user at their level. Think about, you have millions of emails going back and forth in different users, and they're putting different requirements or different comments. Can we have, let's say, a model to summarize that, so we make sure that no user feedback is lost, right? And one other idea for you, I have used AI-powered collaboration tools to facilitate discussions among stakeholders. They're very, very helpful, and I highly recommend something like this for you. So the second phase that John mentioned on the previous slide is I'm waiting for the slide. The decompose application slide. So here you have so many possibilities, about based on the component discovery. So can we have an automated system decomposition to leverage NLP and code analysis to automatically identify system components, dependencies, data flows? What about generating detailed asset list? Right? Or what about, can I have an AWS diagram that it's read by my model and actually it's suggesting different things based on that, or it's basically giving me input on it. Vulnerability discovery and analysis. Can we train the AI models on known vulnerabilities and exploit patterns to identify potential flaws, or maybe to predict some of those? Attack surface visualizations, a lot of those. Control flow analysis, a lot of those. And even simply to evaluate new products or feature, the impact, and to prepare me, to help me talking to the new users. And with that, let's go to the next stages of the threat modeling.
Thanks, Maria. You bring us some really great points there when we're working through this. It'd be very helpful for all of us as we're threat modeling. So let's talk about the next couple stages of threat modeling. And we want to talk about threats. We want to talk about countermeasures. So let's talk about threats first. Generally speaking, we'll sit down, security-minded folks, and et cetera, we'll sit down and try to identify the potential threats against each component. We like to look at things based on confidentiality, integrity, availability. It's a similar triad in security that we always kind of go to, but really it's understanding those things, and it's not just the components themselves, but interactions, right? So we look at frameworks like Stride is a good example to categorize things. There's a lot more frameworks than just Stride alone, so feel free to research more of that. And also too, one of the key things around these threats is we have to understand what's the impact if that threat and vulnerability gets exploited. Right. So what's going to happen if it does? What is that weakness? And if somebody uses that against us, what's going to happen? And then also the likelihood, right? Is this really going to happen, or is this a complex attack path that somebody has to be highly sophisticated to get there? So we think about this and have to realize that and align that with those threats. And we have to prioritize on the most critical ones. Maybe we have a severe, vulnerability and potential threat attack at an authentication mechanism that goes to an administrative interface. That's clearly a high level of severity and a priority you need to think about to the threats because of what could possibly happen with the impact from that. From that, when we look at these threats that we've kind of defined, we've identified, we've gone through, we've ranked and determined, what's important, we can look at the countermeasures and the mitigation strategies that we want to apply. So do we need to develop a control or implement an existing control in a different way to address those identified threats? How might we do that? We may have stuff in place that we're not using effectively, or do we need to write something? Do we need to code it? And then how we look at things too, we want to consider, security best practices, basic hygiene. the coding techniques that we have. Are we following best practice? Do we have the right access controls, encryption? There's so many more you could go into. When you understand those things in terms of your mitigation and those controls that you can implement or need to develop, you can really align that to the ranking of your threats and determine what is the priority for you to deal with. Also allows you to look at the cost effectiveness of something. Can one control help satisfy or deal with the threats across 30 applications? Or, we have to look at how that can go through. So when you build that mitigation plan based on your model, it gives you clear insight between these two areas to move forward. So, Maria, let's get into where we would have use cases for GenAI and these two stages. I think this is the exciting part for me.
Yes, and we already mentioned some of the use cases that are applicable across, but really when we are talking about determining and ranking threats, we are pushing the boundaries of the threats landscape, right? We are talking about threats discovery, prioritization, categorize threats automatically and align against different frameworks, which John mentioned. Analyze the trace attack impact. What about simulating attacks? What about helping us to prepare our penetration testing or red team use cases for it? So a lot of on the use cases, I'll talk a little bit later. What about attack path validation and back feedback for a common going forward, right? Generate explanation of different threats, even for business users. We also can include generating insights based on other security tools, for example, the application scanners, or maybe identifying currently implemented controls and suggesting controls that can mitigate different threats, right? So this is very important topic, and I think a lot to add to our wish list here. Now, on the next slide, the second category is about countermeasures and mitigation. And I have one single line. The very first line is about countermeasure generation. Because this is a whole another topic, probably 2-hour conversation at the minimum. But just keep in mind this: generate automatically the recommendations to identify the threats, to identify the vulnerabilities, and what we can do. So the second side here is the mitigation, and a lot on the mitigation. Create a mitigation strategy, optimize it. What are the impact analysis? I would like to see those for maybe my mitigation strategy, how I need to change it, how to continuously improve my mitigation strategy, how to identify the techniques that I can use. And especially if these techniques are, let's say, I can change 35 threats, but that's going to be across 20 applications. It's going to help me to do it across my landscape. And a lot about optimization and prioritization. So what about if my mitigation strategy says, hey, you need to fix this code and you need to fix it within so many days, and maybe this is in my policy standards and procedures written as well. Can we generate code snippets for mitigation? Can we prioritize these mitigation efforts? Can we suggest security controls for effective mitigation, or maybe changes in the security optimization, the configuration optimization? So that stated, John, I think there's so much more to talk about. Let's finish the threat modeling.
Yeah. That you bring up some really great points, and I would love to have that at my disposal, because those two processes and those stages are critical in your threat modeling. That's where kind of the meat is. So if we have those, that'd make my job a lot easier and a lot quicker. So let's talk about this sort of last kind of state, and it's the validation and iteration. First off, validate. So when we look at all these controls and all these mitigation strategies and the things that we've put together, did we simply do a good job? I'm kind of referring back to some Adam Shostak's framework and his 4 questions, but really we got to know, were these controls effective? Were these implementations effective? Do they work? And then, of course, when we look at iteration, how do we update? How do we update our mitigation strategies as the application evolves? Maria mentioned earlier when we started talking about the use cases is what happens when I have a model and now it's time to add new features to my products. Right. So I have to model those new features. I have to model the new changes in architecture or data flows. So I keep things up to date. It's an ongoing process. It just doesn't stop and then, oh, here's your model. It's like, no, applications and products and systems continue to evolve in a life cycle. Just like that, threat modeling has the same life cycle as it travels along your product and follows with it. It never really ends until really the app is gone and no longer is there. Maybe you can archive all your information, but that's something to keep in mind, is it's living and breathing and it's not a one and done. So the other thing here is really important. This is very useful, especially for maybe your senior leadership or others to help address things, is documentation. There's always some report that we have to generate to share with somebody to understand, hey, these are the things that you need to go and do and take care of. These are the important pieces. So we need to document those findings, the identified threats, the risk, the mitigation strategies. I'm going to give you the top 5 things that you need to go do right now. This can be used when building a new model or even from an existing product that you have modeled. So those are still helpful in both of those kinds of scenarios. So what can we do with GenAI in this last sort of phase 5 here? Maria, what do you got for us?
A lot. Look at this busy slide, right? A lot of the validation and iteration actually comes back to the automation, right? The automating. We can never say it again. I usually use the word hyper automation. So we can utilize the LLMs to generate a wide range of test cases, realistic simulation of attacks on the threat model, so we can prove we know it's okay. It can help us to generate simulation for our penetration testing. By the way, I was on one cybersecurity training when we had generated simulation that was used for user training. Was really engaging. Everybody liked it. Nobody was bored. Nobody thought, oh, you're dragging me to another some type of training that I have to take. It was really nice. How about to generate our red teaming to create the scenarios when we want to attack, or just suggest them. Effective validation of implemented controls, which I already mentioned on the previous slide in a different context. A lot about the monitoring, attack surface coverage, real-time monitoring, which a lot of other vendors actually are promoting now. And then a lot about the continuous learning from new vulnerabilities, new threat intelligence, new attack patterns. And with that, I think this is kind of in general. Unfortunately, we are almost up to the top of the hour, so I'm not going to have the time to kind of a recap on everything what we discussed, but kind of I think we made a good point here. So let's go to the next slide. This is a new slide that I added, guys, especially per request from my last meeting, my last presentation. People came to me and said, so listen, I went to my boss and I asked for money. I want to experiment with GenAI. I think I have a good idea. It's going to be very valuable for us. And my boss asked me, well, okay, but first of all, how much money you want? And then second, how you're going to prove to me that there's actually going to be a progress? How you're going to show me your progress? What are your steps? What are your criteria? What are your KPIs? Because I don't believe, it's a brand new technology. It's too new. I don't believe it's actually going to be valuable. And so I created this slide for you guys to help you with some of the KPIs in terms of effectiveness in accuracy, in terms of efficiency, and then user experience. And user experience can be throughout your company and including your users, right? In order for you guys to use that, you need to have your current baseline. So this is a prerequisite. So you can fairly compare what is today and what is tomorrow. How much time it takes me today to create a threat model versus how much it's taking me now. Is this 50% or whatever of saving of time real number that I showed you on the previous chart? Maybe this is estimation, so maybe it's not true to me. Do I have blind spots today? Did I reduce the number of blind spots I have? Did I decrease the number of false positive? What is my coverage surface right now? Did it increase? What is my reduction in remediation time of the identified threat? So these are all good points to keep in mind. And with that, on the next slide, how to start with GenAI? This is a question that I get all the time, so I created a slide for that. And my recommendations are very simple. Educate and train and explore. The word explore is very important. I didn't put it here on this slide, but maybe I should put it on the very first line. Identify clear use cases. That's very important. And select a good pilot project. Select something that it's small enough. You have enough money and resources. Select a good pilot to show the impact specifically to your company. Probably neither John, neither I can advise you where to start because we don't know your specific problems, your environments, right? But something like this is very important so you can really prove the value immediately. Another thing to consider is about the data readiness and what data you're using. You guys have heard garbage in, garbage out expression, right? So we may need to consider what kind of LLM do we want to adapt, how this LLM is trained. Maybe this LLM has a IP data, it's been trained on IP data that they don't have right to do it. Can I take on this responsibility? Or maybe what kind of additional data that it's typical to my environment I need to use and to prepare and to use for fine-tuning of the LLM that I chose. So these are all new considerations that we haven't thought about that before. And of course, be also prepared for the ethical considerations, guys. It's a mandate, and we are all the professionals that should require to put our foot down and say, hey, establish the guidelines for ethical usage. We need to comply to them. We need to ensure the compliance with the data, the privacy regulations. We are the people to build them, and we are the people to promote that. So very, very important. And with that, we are going back to our last slide. In a nutshell, don't be afraid to innovate. Embrace innovation with GenAI. It's something here to help us. It's a promising frontier in cybertech, offering novel solutions to maybe old problems that we had before, and it's changing our life, not just our life as technologists, not so our life at work, our life at home, our personal life, how we interact with technology. All of this is changing with GenAI, right? So embrace it and be intentional when you apply it and when you use it. Apply cautious where it's needed. Did it provide the right answer to me or not? The assessment, to assess and prepare for this ethical exploration, it's crucial to navigate the ethical consideration, the regulatory landscape, to understand what we are doing, right? Apply continuous learning, apply GenAI, but continuously learn with GenAI. And it's basically a culture that we need to change of this continuous learning as we are using this GenAI in this transformative journey for cybertech. And the very last one, strive for these future possibilities, aim for this transparency, reshape the security area with GenAI for a better digital world for all of us. And with that, thank you very much, guys, for being here today, for joining us at your lunch. And I hope to continue the discussion and the conversation, because that's the purpose of this session. This is not probably this may be one of the first, but definitely not the last. And we do need your experience from the field. What do you feel? What do you think? What do you need? Keep joining this dreaming about and building the wish list. Thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks, Maria, for talking about this. I think Claire may have a poll for everybody to take. And then I know we just have about 3 minutes left here. So we might be able to get in one question or something. So if somebody wants to maybe put that in, or Claire, if you want to help us with that.
Yeah, let's do the poll. I think this is very important.
Yep, we've got that live now. I can see people answering. So the question is, would you be interested in another session to discuss AI threat modeling tools? We've had 58, it's going up. But basically, we've got about 83% saying yes, one saying no, and then a few maybes. We also posted in the chat of what other topics you'd like to cover. Someone has said about how GenAI is applied to a threat model project, and someone else said possibly a walkthrough on an example threat model to show GenAI being used. So thank you all very much for your suggestions. We will make sure if there's any need for follow-up, we'll do that afterwards. Just going to end the poll now. I think about 100 of you have taken part, so thank you very much for that.
Sounds good. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Maria, for your expertise, and it's been wonderful talking to all of you today. Thank you for attending and being with us as we explore the possible, as we continue to look at how we can advance things in the work that we do. So there we go.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you all.